Welcome to the deep dive. In our connected world, there are these hidden battles constantly being fought right beneath the surface, battles for influence, for control, all happening in the digital realm.
It's a really important area to understand.
Absolutely. And today we're going to crack open a key report that sheds light on this. It's called Hacking Minds and Machines, and it comes from the EU Institute for Security Studies.
Yeah, this report is crucial because it really zeroes in on that dangerous mix, the link between foreign information manipulation and actual cyber attacks. It makes it crystal clear these aren't separate problems.
Exactly. They're connected tactics. And this isn't some abstract threat report. It shows how this foreign interference stuff touches almost everything. Like what you see scrolling through social media, yeah, but also the critical infrastructure, the systems that power our everyday lives.
And the scope the report covers is, well, it's pretty broad. It looks at the political side, social impacts, the economy, the digital space itself, obviously, and even international security. It really drives home how interconnected these threats are.
Okay, so let's get into it. A big theme that jumps out right away in the report is building resilience. It's not just about defending against attacks after they happen, but strengthening our societies, our digital foundations beforehand.
Precisely. And the report uses some really compelling case studies to show how this works in practice. Maybe we should start with the hacking minds part, the information manipulation side of things.
Sounds good. The report kicks off with a deep dive into China's methods, using the Czech Republic as a specific example. It really paints a picture of how political pressure and online manipulation work hand in hand.
What's really insightful there is this concept. They mention China aiming for discourse power. It's not just about winning one argument online. It's more subtle. It's about shaping the whole conversation over time, what's seen as acceptable or not, both inside China and internationally.
And the ways they try to achieve this, according to the report, it's quite a list. Investing in media outlets in Europe, hiring PR firms, coordinating opinion pieces, even offering financial incentives for favorable coverage.
And then there's the less visible stuff, like quietly distributing content that was actually prepared in China without disclosing where it came from. That makes it much harder to see the full picture.
Yeah, and the report flags a shift in tactics too, particularly after 2019, more outsourcing.
Exactly. Relying more on local partners, spreading articles anonymously, especially around sensitive topics like the Hong Kong protests or the origins of COVID-19. It makes you wonder why the shift, maybe the direct approach wasn't working as well, or maybe this just offered new angles.
It also mentions Chinese diplomats themselves getting more, well, assertive, pushing back hard on things like the COVID origin theories, trying to contrast China with the US, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine.
And it's important to grasp what triggers these more coercive moves. The report suggests it's often when China feels its core interests are threatened. Things like its political system, national security, sovereignty, economic stability. So the pressure isn't random.
But it's often hidden, right? The report really stresses how hard it is to track all this because it's secretive, uses indirect players, makes connecting the dots back to Beijing a real challenge.
Absolutely. Which leads us right into that Czech Republic case.
Hmm.
This makes it all very concrete. There's always been this tension in Czech debates about China, the lure of economic benefits versus serious concerns about human rights.
And the Czech security services, they were pretty vocal early on, weren't they? The report mentions their warnings about telecom companies like ZTE and Huawei.
Oh, definitely. And that whole incident with Senate President Yaroslav Kubera planning a trip to Taiwan, that really brought the pressure out into the open. Even President Zeman warned about damaging economic ties.
But then the Chinese embassy got directly involved, sending that letter.
Yes, that letter to the Czech president's office. It wasn't subtle. The report quotes parts of it explicit threats of economic consequences for Czech companies if Kubera went to Taiwan. Really stark stuff.
And the timing. The letter leaking right after Kubera's sudden death caused a huge public outcry, didn't it?
A massive outcry. It really galvanized opinion. And then the new Senate president, Milusz Vystrčil, decided to go ahead with a visit anyway. That was despite pressure from his own president, the prime minister, even the business community. Took real political guts.
It seems like it. And China's reaction.
Immediate and angry. Warnings of a heavy price, calling Vystrčil a political hooligan. But interestingly, this kind of backfired. It triggered this wave of international support for Vystrčila's MEPs, other parliamentarians writing open letters.
So it really didn't achieve what China wanted in that instance. And then came the disinformation campaign against Vistro, that fake email about him getting millions.
Right, claiming he received $4 million for the trip. And the report notes this was spread by outlets like China Radio International, and also picked up by those pro-Russian, anti-Western websites that operate in the Czech Republic.
So the bottom line on the Czech case.
Well, the report concludes China's efforts pretty much backfired. Public awareness about their tactics went up, and the actual economic fallout was minimal.
And the Czech response is interesting, too. No formal EU counter-coercion toolbox back then, but Vystrčil used what the report calls passive resistance, built international support, leveraged the fact that Czechia wasn't hugely economically dependent on China, and had strong media backing. Maybe a model there.
It makes you think, doesn't it? That combination seemed effective. It's ironic, really, the attempt to pressure Vystrčil ended up kind of boosting his standing.
Okay, so that's a fascinating look at hacking minds in the Czech context. The report also looks at the Kremlin's activities, particularly in Bulgaria.
It does, yeah. It shifts focus to Bulgaria and examines these pro-neutrality protests that popped up after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And here you really see the interplay between internal factors within Bulgaria and that external Russian influence.
The report suggests Bulgaria is maybe particularly vulnerable because of existing pro-Russian sentiment in parts of society, political instability, the media landscape.
Exactly. Those factors create an opening. And since the invasion, the report documents a definite uptick in information manipulation, pro-Russian media narratives, attempts at political infiltration, even cyber attacks, all seemingly aimed at splitting Bulgarian society and weakening its ties to the EU and NATO.
This often works through local actors, right? People sympathetic to Russia operating in what the report calls sort of opaque networks.
Yes, precisely. Which brings us to those pro-neutrality protests. The report argues these weren't necessarily organic movements in the Western sense, but more like tools in the Kremlin's playbook to undermine Bulgaria's alliances and stir up divisions.
And the nationalist Vozrozhdene party features heavily here. The report identifies them as a key pro-Russian voice.
Very much so. They consistently push Kremlin talking points, refuse to condemn the war, oppose sanctions. Their leader was even kicked out of Ukraine for his pro-Russian stance. So the alignment is pretty clear.
And they organize protests calling for neutrality, opposing aid to Ukraine, pushing for closer ties with Russia. The report mentions things like protesters carrying Russian flags at National Day events.
Yeah, and protesting attempts to rename streets near the Russian embassy to honor Ukrainian heroes, or Boris Nemtsov. Trying to remove the Ukrainian flag from the municipality building. Their disinformation strategy is quite aggressive, too, using Facebook, Telegram, TikTok, and getting amplified by some mainstream outlets. It definitely has an impact.
A significant impact, it sounds like, influencing public opinion, policy debates, maybe even election results, and those polls consistently showing a preference for neutrality.
It really highlights the polarization. You see counter-protests, clashes over history, deep divisions on the causes of the war, and even whether a Russian victory would be a threat to Bulgaria itself.
But the Bulgarian government isn't just sitting back, is it? The report mentions efforts to expose these actors.
That's right. The State Agency for National Security, their intelligence service, has been reporting on Kremlin hybrid activities. There have been countermeasures, reports of payments from the Kremlin to Bulgarian figures, politicians, journalists, expulsions of Russian diplomats, exposing espionage within their own counterintelligence.
So it's an ongoing struggle. The Kremlin exploiting vulnerabilities created by propaganda and political instability. Okay, that gives us a good sense of the hacking minds dimension. Let's pivot now to hacking machines. The report talks a lot about cyber-enabled IP theft.
Yes. This is where the economic angle of foreign interference really comes into focus. Cyber espionage, stealing intellectual property, it's framed as a key tactic, especially in this era of, intense geostrategic and tech competition.
And the stakes are huge economically. The report even mentions that G20 agreement condemning state-sponsored IP theft for commercial gain. That shows how serious it is at a global level.
Absolutely. If you steal valuable IP, you get a massive unfair advantage. You can skip years of R&D, undercut prices, file patents on stolen tech. The report calls it a silent siege, state-backed cyber theft, purely for commercial advantage.
And Operation Cuckoo Bees is the big example here.
Yes, a really significant case. Cybereason, the cybersecurity firm, uncovered this long-running campaign targeting about 30 multinational companies. Massive IP theft over years.
How massive are we talking?
Hundreds of gigabytes of sensitive data. Think blueprints, formulas, confidential documents, manufacturing secrets, really valuable stuff.
And the report attributes this to the Winty Group, linked to China's Ministry of State Security, the MSS. You mentioned APTs earlier, advanced persistent threats. So sophisticated, long-term attackers, often state-backed.
Exactly. And the MSS is described as this intelligence enterprise that even includes contract hackers. The initial ways in might be basic spear phishing, social engineering, but then their tactics get very sophisticated. They're persistent, agile, they compromise supply chains, use stolen certificates, advanced stuff to stay hidden and steal data.
And the targets, tech and manufacturing, right? In Asia, Europe, North America, and it lines up with China's economic plans.
Precisely. Healthcare, pharma, semiconductors, electric vehicles, telecoms. It aligns very closely with the priorities in China's 5-year plans. Suggests a clear economic espionage motive. Gathering intelligence may be ahead of mergers or deals, too.
The consequences for the victims must be devastating.
Oh, absolutely. The report outlines huge business continuity risks. Even before a breach, you've got rising cybersecurity costs. After a breach, lost royalties, lawsuits, fines, repair costs, R&D write-offs. Long-term, you could lose market access, orders, entire sectors can be disadvantaged. The report even mentions Nortel as an example of a company potentially collapsing due to IP theft.
And it ripples outwards, affecting global governance, undermining trust in cyberspace, trade rules.
Definitely. It erodes the norms of responsible state behavior online and impacts the international trade system like the WTO. And it pushes countries and companies towards things like trusted geographies and de-risking, which creates its own set of complications.
So what are the responses? The report mentions quite a few things.
Yeah, a whole range. Counterintelligence outreach to businesses like the FBI does, criminal investigations, charges against hackers, cyber sanctions, rewards for information, publicly attributing attacks to the UK, and allies did this with CloudHopper and the Microsoft Exchange hack. Cybersecurity research, public advisories from agencies like CISA, new laws like the UK's National Security Act, or Japan's economic security laws.
But the report's conclusion is a bit sobering, isn't it? These responses haven't really stopped state-sponsored cyber espionage.
Not significantly, no. Especially when the states involved framed it as vital for their national security. And with geopolitical tensions rising, the report suggests the risk is actually growing, particularly in knowledge-based economies.
Which makes that uncertainty around the NXP incident mentioned in the report quite telling. Attribution remains hard, and we need strong early warning and defenses.
Exactly. It highlights those ongoing challenges.
Okay, let's move to another area where machines and manipulation meet: deepfakes and disinformation. This technology seems to be evolving incredibly fast.
It really is. Deepfakes, as the report defines them, are basically AI-generated audio or video designed to realistically mimic real people. That fake Biden robocall in New Hampshire during the primaries, that's a perfect example of the potential for political interference.
And the tech behind it, GN's generative adversarial networks, they're getting better all the time, making it harder and harder to spot the fakes. It's like an AI arms race, one creating fakes, the other trying to detect them.
And while there are benign uses, like in medicine, the worry is the malicious potential. The report mentions other incidents, fake videos of Biden, Clinton before the U.S. elections, that alleged confession video in Myanmar used against Aung San Suu Kyi.
Even things that aren't technically deepfakes, like the Ghost of Kiev story in Ukraine, show how powerful fabricated content can be, especially in a crisis. The report notes AI-generated stuff being used in the Ukraine war, even if debunked quickly, it grabs attention and can still muddy the waters.
Beyond specific incidents, the report looks at the broader impact. In high-stress situations, deepfakes could cause real disruption, say, for first responders or soldiers, by messing with their situational awareness. Longer term, the worry is erosion of trust in institutions, in media. It impairs public debate, boosts the credibility of bad actors, and helps them micro-target people with tailored disinformation.
And it's getting easier to make them, right? The report mentions software like Deepface Lab being readily available that represent U.S. ad campaign using deepfakes showed how accessible it is.
Exactly. The barrier to entry is dropping. So what about responses? Law enforcement is definitely aware. Europol has reported on the challenges. The EU is working on defenses too. There's the strengthened code of practice on disinformation, which specifically calls out deepfakes as manipulative and pushes for better detection and labeling.
And the Digital Services Act, the DSA, that has teeth, right? Penalties for disinformation, platforms needing to remove illegal content.
It does. And the new AI Act mandates disclosure for AI-generated content in some cases, though the report notes deepfakes are currently classed as limited risk, which might mean that transparency rules aren't as tough as some would like.
Plus, a lot of this stuff circulates off the main platforms, right? On dodgy websites, messaging apps, the darknet.
That's a huge challenge. Makes detection and takedown much harder, which is why investing in AI for detection is so critical. The report concludes we need this collaborative approach. Legal, tech, societal resilience all working together. The EU is well placed to push for responsible AI use and better detection.
Okay, now let's tackle this nexus between cyber threats and FIMI, foreign information manipulation and interference, especially regarding critical infrastructure. The Albania case seems key here.
Yeah, that was a major incident in 2022. An Iranian cyber attack hitting government websites and services, followed by ransomware, destructive malware. Quite serious.
And crucially, it wasn't just a cyber attack. There was an information campaign alongside it.
Exactly. The Iranian cyber group, Homeland Justice, spread anti-MEK messages on the infected systems, set up websites, used social media. The goal, according to the report, was clearly to undermine Albania for hosting the MEK group. It really shows how cyber and information operations are used together.
The report mentions the EU's External Action Service analyzed this across domains, but it also calls for treating cyber and information environments as more interconnected, right? And getting more precise about defining critical information environment infrastructure.
Yes. The report then lays out 4 ways this cyber-FIMI link plays out with critical infrastructure. One is cyber attacks hitting the ICT systems that spread information. Another is attacks directly targeting the information environment, like defacing websites or hijacking social media accounts.
What are the other two?
Cyber espionage, to gather info for later manipulation campaigns. And then information operations specifically designed to shape how people think about critical infrastructure. The report gives examples like China's narratives in Italy after the Belt and Road Initiative deal, stuff around rare earth mining, or even U.S. efforts against Huawei.
And deciding if a cyber incident is interference is a political call, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And the report highlights the challenge of dealing with the sheer number of attacks. We need clearer thresholds for what counts as a significant incident that triggers a specific policy response.
And the impact varies hugely depending on the country, the target, the type of attack.
Exactly. Ransomware hitting an energy supplier is different from hitting a news site. A DDoS attack is different from espionage or data destruction. And all of these can potentially damage the information environment of a company or even a whole country. EU law already tries to identify essential services based on potential impact on public safety, cross-border effects, etc.
So policy responses need to be multi-pronged.
Definitely. Strengthening resilience is key things, like the NIS2 directive, CERT-EU, National Cyber Response Teams, CSIRTs. Then there's deterrence U.S. hunt forward teams, the EU cyber diplomacy toolbox with sanctions, maybe bringing cyber into the FIMI toolbox too.
And the legal side?
Criminal justice approaches are important. Getting cross-border access to electronic evidence, things like the Cloud Act, EU rules, the Budapest Convention update, plus public-private cooperation, like taking down botnets or troll farms.
And international cooperation is vital too.
Essential. G7 statements, UN initiatives like the Pact for the Future, the EU-US cyber dialogue. The report notes there's growing recognition now of how tightly cybersecurity and strategic communications are linked.
It admits measuring the exact impact of these combined cyber-FIMI ops is hard, but the awareness is growing.
Yes, CISA in the US has guidance on this, and NESA and the EEEs in the EU have a formal agreement. The key message is that critical infrastructure protection strategies must think about and protect their information environment too. We need better info sharing.
It mentions CERT-EU's Social Media Assurance Service, SMAS.
As an example, yes. And strengthening those multi-stakeholder partnerships, government, industry, researchers, is critical. Maybe even specific information sharing and analysis centers, ISACs, focused on FIMI or including FIMI in existing sector-specific ISACs.
And the final point there is that good communication after a cyber incident can actually limit the space for manipulators to operate.
Exactly. Clear, timely communication helps counter disinformation narratives that often try to exploit the confusion after an attack.
Okay, as we start to synthesize all this, what are some of the key patterns or themes that run through the report?
Well, one big one is that these interference operations often happen in parallel. You might see cyber spying, IP theft, and a disinformation campaign all running at once, maybe to distract or make the other parts more effective. Also, the report notes that frequent government changes can sometimes make it harder for countries to build a consistent response.
And it's not just online, is it? That check letter incident shows how offline actions connect. It ripples across different spheres.
Absolutely. Online, offline, cross-sectoral. Another major theme is the lack of transparency. These operations thrive on secrecy, cyber espionage, covert attacks, coercion, information manipulation, using front companies or opaque networks, anonymous social media amplification. It all makes attribution incredibly difficult.
We also see different approaches to regulation, right? Inconsistencies in how policies are implemented.
Yes, different countries might focus more on tech solutions versus human-centric ones, apply criminal justice measures differently, or prioritize cybersecurity policy over disinformation policy, or vice versa. It's not always joined up.
And even when policies exist, implementation can be inconsistent. Attribution is political, enforcement varies.
Right, which leads to the report's call for a more holistic approach, especially for the EU. Building stronger defenses means better threat assessments, strategies that cover that whole cyber information spectrum, clear roles, early warning, better info sharing, more policy coherence.
And international cooperation is key to that.
Crucial. The report argues for tailored partnerships with global watchdogs on cyber and disinformation, better cooperation between intelligence, law enforcement, and the private sector, more investment in investigative journalism, public awareness, and holding social media platforms accountable.
And finally, that need for greater public awareness and resilience.
Yes, clear communication from governments about why they make certain decisions, exposing interference when possible, using pre-bunking to inoculate people against likely disinformation, better information sharing between trusted partners, and investing in skills like the EU Cybersecurity Skills Academy to build a more resilient public.
So wrapping up, this Hacking Minds and Machines report really lays out the complexity of foreign interference today.
It does. It shows the interconnected threats, the diverse tactics from subtle manipulation to disruptive cyber attacks, and how they impact pretty much everything.
And it highlights the real challenges in fighting back the complexity, the secrecy, the sheer speed of technological change that attackers exploit.
But it's not all doom and gloom. The report strongly advocates for a multifaceted response, boosting resilience, fostering international cooperation, having robust and adaptable regulations, and, critically, empowering the public through awareness and education.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, listening. We've talked about these invisible battles happening online, trying to shape what you think and do. So maybe reflect on this. What individual steps can you take day to day to become a more informed, more resilient digital citizen? We definitely encourage you to check out the EYS report itself if you want to dive even deeper.